Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, Mackenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Pete Rogers. Pete spends many days a year afield enjoying God's creation while hunting, fishing, hiking, or camping. Pete is a graduate from the University of South Carolina and earned a master's in divinity before being ordained. More than 25 years ago, Pete began merging his love for writing and his love for the outdoors. Pete is the host of the award-winning podcast, Christian Outdoors Podcast. Pete has published more than 1,200 magazine articles and 4,000 photographs in his career. His stories and photographs have earned more than 60 awards in literacy, photographic, and videography competitions. When he is not doing all this, he works full-time for the USDA as a trapper in his home state of South Carolina. Pete is a very special guest, and last year I had the honor to be on his podcast where he allowed me to share my story for the first time publicly. And sharing my story and seeing the response from listeners is what prompted me to start this podcast. Thanks so much for being with us today, Pete.
Oh, Mackenzie, it's truly an honor to be on your show. It really is. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I loved getting to be on your podcast and just have loved following along your journey and what you're doing in the Christian outdoor space as well. And so would love for you to just share with the listeners just a little bit more about you and who you are.
Wow. Well, your intro makes me sound a lot grander than I feel and that I am. But, I guess after a lifetime of doing those things add up over time, right? But as you said, I've been an outdoor writer and communicator for 25 years now. I started Christian Outdoors Podcast in 2019 because I have a passion for Jesus and have a passion for the outdoors. And I wanted a place where I could talk about both of them. And also being engaged in the outdoor industry for so long, I've learned that many of the people we see on TV, the outdoor celebrities, are also people of faith. They just don't have a platform in which to share it. So I said, well, why don't I create one? That's kind of what we do, isn't it, Mackenzie? We see a need and we fill the void, right? So I created it in 2019, and it was like a lot of podcasts, Mackenzie, very slow going, very... And is anybody listening? I'm dedicated to do one a week for a year. That was my goal. I'm do one a week for a year. And after a year, I'm like, well, that was pretty fun. I want to keep doing this. And it took us, I like to tell this story, if you don't mind, is in August. So I started in October of 2019. In August of 22, I think it was. Maybe in 21. No, it's 21, August of 21. So almost 2 complete years. I was like, this is taking so much work. It's so hard. I only got 25,000 total, or I think it was 45,000 total downloads. And, from 2 years, 100 episodes, only 40, is it really worth it? So I went to my cabin that I have here in South Carolina, my little off-grid cabin, and I spent some time praying, fasting, and seeking God and saying, well, what should I do? Should I do more Christian stuff, less outdoors? Should I do more outdoor stuff, less Christian? And like happens so many times, Mackenzie, I got silence. All right, God, give me a sign. And he's like, no, you just got to trust me more. Trust me more. So when I left there after 3 days, I was like, well, I guess I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. So let me give you the timeline. That was in August. I had 45,000 total downloads. In November, I had 45,000 for the month.
Wow.
Yeah. And in December, I had 65,000 for the month. I'm like, I did nothing different. Absolutely nothing different. And it was like, it just took off. And we hit 1 million listeners in February of last year of 23. And now we're at 2.5 million. So in 23 alone, we hit 1.7 million listeners just in 2023 alone. So God is really just pouring his blessing out on us. And it's fun to see. a little overwhelming to think that many people are listening. And I'm like, all right, Pete, don't blow this. Don't blow it. The momentum's going, keep it going. And so I don't do as much writing anymore because the podcast getting so big, so fast has taken a significant amount of my time. So I published the fewest articles last year that I have in over 20 years. And that's okay. Sometimes our careers take a different turn, right? I'm still talking about the outdoors. I'm still getting to talk about my faith, and it's been a really good ride. It really is.
That's absolutely amazing. And I just, it's just amazing how much God can do in such a short amount of time. And just your story is a testimony of that. And, I think just also you being obedient and taking it to the Lord and being like, hey, what do you want me to do with this? I'm not sure. I'm feeling a certain way about it. I need some help. Mm-hmm. Well, no matter what that looks like. And if that's just, I need to trust you more, then so be it. Maybe I'm trying to do this all by myself, and you invited him into it. And I think that that's beautiful because, obviously that ended up working out really well for you.
So far, when I started it was, my little tagline is where we discuss all things outdoors and how to enjoy God every day. And that was and as you know, we talked about this when you were on my show. That's been a driving force for me for about 10 years now is every day when I wake up, how can I enjoy God today? What can I do to enjoy God? Not just acknowledge God or recognize God or see the beauty that he has done, but to enjoy him in a very intimate, personal way every single day. And you have to be really intentional to do that, and confession time, every day I don't do as good as I should. I'm not as intentional as I need to be because I get busy.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the tools that Satan uses is the tool of distraction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I know that our outdoor recreation looks a little bit different. So why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners kind of what that space looks like for you and what your hobbies entail?
Well, I'm going to say it's different, but I do more things than you do. How about that? Because I love hiking and camping too. Okay. But I also enjoy hunting and fishing, and I make a living trapping, with the USDA. So I really enjoy hunting. I really enjoy fishing, but it seems that, as an outdoor rider, you get cubby holed pretty quick in the industry once you start to get a name for yourself and say, Pete's our archery guy. Pete's the guy who writes about archery hunting. That's him, and so I get bombarded with those. I'm thinking, well, I like to do this other stuff too, but as I tell people, you write what pays the bills so you can afford to write what you enjoy. Okay. So, and that's where my books came in. I've written 6 books so far, and the style of writing I enjoy doing in the outdoor style isn't really published much anymore. And this is way before your time, probably your parents' time, of more adventure and nostalgia, and that style of writing is what I really enjoy doing and what I think I'm the best at in my writing style. But that's not what people will buy and publish. So you write what they'll pay you for, so you can afford to write what you enjoy. And so, as a hunter, and I'm unapologetically a hunter, I love everything about it. And interestingly, I love it all. I like hunting birds. I like hunting rabbits and squirrels. I enjoy hunting grouse. I enjoy hunting elk and mule deer and whitetail here at home and turkeys. I enjoy it all because it gets me outside. It's a different challenge in a different environment. And one of the things I like to tell people, Mackenzie, is that, at my age, it's not about taking the animal. I've taken just about every animal in North America that I want to. And in some cases, a lot of them. It's more about where I get to go and the people I get to meet. As we talked about before we started recording, I went to Wyoming this year on an antelope hunt because I'd never been antelope hunting. But I met some amazing people out there and got to camp outside in God's wonderful, because I love the weather. I'd move to Wyoming tomorrow if my wife would go. Right. I love everything about it. And, seeing the stars and the cold nights and I slept in the bed of my truck, by the way, and my buddy who's with me, he had a tent outside, and we had have you seen that slumberjack tent that a tarp?
I have, yeah.
That thing is wonderful. It attaches on the back of your truck. So we use that. And I'm a strong advocate for that product. It just worked great. We didn't have any rain, We had shade, a good place to do our cooking and stuff. It worked wonderful. It really did. But I just slept in the bed of my truck I have the decked system, the drawers in the bed of your truck, and I
Yep.
just slept on top of that. And it worked great, but just getting to be in the wilderness of Wyoming for, well, I think we hunted 11 days. It was that's why I went. And yeah, we went for mule deer and antelope, didn't see a mule deer at all. Right. So it shows it's not about the killing. It's about the pursuit. Right. And they kicked our tails. The mule deer just kicked our tails, and that was wonderful, but we still had a great time. It's not a failure when you go out hunting and you don't bring something home. Gene Hill, I'm going to paraphrase it, and I'm probably going to do a really poor job of it. He said he came back from hunting one day and his neighbor said, did you get anything? And the way Gene Hill, he's my favorite outdoor writer, he said, if you count success by the weight of your game bag instead of by the memories that you earned, then you've missed the whole point.
Yeah, I love that.
And that's where I am. It's about the memories I make and the places I get to go, the people I get to meet, and that's why I do it. And even if I go here by myself on my place that I've hunted for 20-something years, it's still a new experience every time.
Yeah. And is hunting something that you grew up doing, or how did you get into this sport?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. My dad was not a hunter at all. He was a golfer, and neither of my grandfathers were alive when I was born, where they died before I was 2. So I did not have an outdoor mentor. To your question, the way I discovered it was we lived in the country in Saluda, South Carolina. And I saw a magazine one day with a doll sheep on it at the local country store, and it was 75 cents, Sports Afield, and I bought it. And I went and started reading that stories. I thought, this sounds so cool. And I just kept reading these stories. I said, that back when they published the good stuff, the nostalgia where you could feel the wind on your face on the side of the mountain that Jack O'Connor was writing about, or that Jim Zumbo was writing about. You were there with them, and it piqued a curiosity in me that I think God had in me from the beginning, is a curiosity to go find out. So I was 13 at the time, and my birthday is 4 days after Christmas. Horrible time for a kid. Okay. Horrible. So I remember asking my parents, I said, I want a 22 rifle for my birthday, but I want it in October when squirrel season opens. Because I had no exposure to hunting from anybody. Dad shot doves occasionally, but that was it. So I got it, a Sears and Roebuck 22 rifle with a scope on it. I thought I was in high cotton, Mackenzie, because I had the scope on my gun. Let me tell you. And nobody showed me how to zero it in. Nobody showed me how to load it. I had zero gun training other than don't shoot the gun in the house. Like you had to be told that, right? Yeah. So I just started going out in the back pasture, through the pasture to the woods behind the house. And took my first squirrel back there, and I still love squirrel hunting because it's what created it in me. And it just gave me a passion. And so one day I was reading one of my magazines, and there was this goes way back before you. You old listeners will know this. It was a great program. Outdoor Life had it. It's called the Outdoor Life Book Club. And if you mailed in $1, they would send you 10 books. You just had to agree to purchase 2 books at full price within a year. I was like, well, even a 14-year-old knew that was a good deal. So I put my $1 in the envelope and I mailed it off. And sure enough, I got this pack of books that came in. I still have them on my bookcase. It was hunting small game, hunting white-tailed deer, learning how to track and find game, how to make your own fishing rods, how to make your own fishing lures, all these very simple 80 to 100 page basic how-to books. And I would literally take that book with me to the woods. And I'm reading, so this is a squirrel track. I'm looking and no, that's not a squirrel track. What is this? And I would just do that over and over and over again until I could learn the different things. There's a lot of failure. But I love being in the woods, and I love discovering new things about nature. And it's, I say the woods loosely because I could be in the prairies and feel the same way, right? I just mean outside away from civilization and suburbia, and just it invigorates me. I just have this insatiate curiosity to continue to learn more and find more. So I just took to it myself. Yeah.
That's cool. I love a good self-taught story. I think that's not super common these days. And, it's kind of like, well, I don't have somebody to teach me, so therefore I can't do it. And it's like, you still have the capability to learn. So yeah. I love that. I'm a little shocked that your parents gave you a gun at 13 and didn't give you any lessons on how to use it. But, it
was a different time
let that
back
one
then.
slide.
It was a different time back then, Mackenzie. I mean, I'm of that generation where when we went to high school, we all had guns in the back windows of our trucks. And you know what? Nobody shot anybody. How about that?
Yep.
How about that?
Yeah. That's wild. So obviously this is a Christian podcast specifically about the outdoors. So would love to know just how the outdoors plays a role specifically in your relationship with Christ.
Wow. Well, it's cliche to say that's where I feel closest to them, but because it's not where I feel closest, but I am more intimate with God when I'm outdoors. If I may share a story of how this was really driven home to me at a critical time in my life. I had a really good opportunity to go hunt moose in Alaska, and it was just pay to get here, public land, unguided, with some other guys. We all just kind of, let's just go try this. And so I went, right? And I saved my money, literally saved my money, and went on a 3-week moose hunt in Alaska for $1,200. That's tags and airfare and everything. So it was very cheap, very camping out in the wilderness of Alaska. We were 5 to 6 hours from the nearest road that we were in by machine. We rode 4-wheelers and other stuff to get in there. But anyway, so I don't remember which day it was, like 6 or 7 of the hunt. We would walk out and go up to the top of the hill and then use binoculars to look for moose. And by now we had gotten comfortable to go alone. We could find our way back. So we all went in different directions, right? And I went to the top of this hill and I'm just sitting there and I'm looking, and off to my right, about 20 miles away, but looks closer, is a big glacier that's forming the river that we're camped beside. As it melts, it makes the river, right? And then off to my left, it just went off of just willows and spruce trees as far as the eye could see. I mean, you could see for hundreds of miles in any direction. And I felt so insignificant. I'm like, look at how beautiful all this is. And I was just in awe in such a way that I can't even describe, Mackenzie. And I just said to myself, I feel so insignificant. Nobody in the world knows where I am. Not another clue. Only God knows. I'm just one little speck on this little hill somewhere in Alaska. And it just really insignificant. And I'm just sitting there taking it in. And all of a sudden it hit me just like getting bipped upside the head. You're not insignificant, because you're the most significant thing there is. That glacier is not created in God's image. This valley is not created in God's image. Those mountains that you see that you're just in awe of are not created in God's image. You are created in God's image. You are the signature of this masterpiece, Pete. And that just flooded in me, and I just got so emotional and thinking, wow, of all this stuff that I am just taking in, how unbelievably beautiful it is. It doesn't matter to God like I matter to God. And that moment, Mackenzie, helped me understand that no matter what you're going through, no matter how hard life is, no matter how tough it can be, you matter to God. That the creator of the entire world knows you by name. And he knows, Pete, that you're sitting on top of this hill somewhere in Alaska. He knows where you are. And he knows that you need to hear a word from him right now. And he told me, I matter. And ever since then, when I go outside and I'm in the deer stand, or I'm on a busting brush looking for grouse up in northern Wisconsin, or listening to beagles run a rabbit, I go back to that day on top of that mountain every single time. And it reminds me that I am the signature on his masterpiece. You are the signature on his masterpiece, Mackenzie. You are the most important thing to God, not anything else. You. So that's how it connects me to my relationship with Christ, is because I know that Jesus loved me enough to let me know that I matter to him, and I mattered enough that he would die for me. Then yeah, it's something that just really is it's a very humbling feeling to know that the creator of all knows me by name.
Wow, that's such a good perspective. And I say good because that is not a perspective that I think that I would have said before this. And I really, I guess, just never thought about it that way in the capacity of, I look at nature and I'm like, this is God's creation as well, and so like it's just as important. And he didn't come and die on the cross for the trees and the mountains, like he came for us. And so I just love that you just shared that, because I think that it's one of those things you like know in your brain when you talk through it, but it's like, do you know that in your heart? And so I know I'm touched by that story, and I know that that's really challenging my perspective, and I know my brain's just turning, and I'm like, wow, I've never thought of it like that. Like, that's a good perspective. And also, like, knowing that God's with you, and like you said, you're the only person there, and no one knows where you are. It's like God knows, like no matter whether you're on top of a mountain in Alaska or you're in your house trying to hide from him, like regardless of where you are, he knows.
I can see you.
Yep. It's a good reminder.
I mean, yeah, you carry the image of the creator, and that is an awesome thing, that he loves you that much, that he wants you to be in a relationship with him like that.
Yeah. So I know that you spend a lot of time in the outdoors in some really amazing places. And I know that you just shared this story of this major trip that you just took, to Alaska, and you really experienced God there. But what advice would you have for a listener who maybe lives in a, urban environment, maybe in the middle of a city, and wants to experience God through nature? What piece of advice would you give them?
And I covered that in my book that I wrote about how to enjoy God, that people who live in apartment buildings in New York City, how they going to experience God in the outdoors. And I think we can overthink that a lot. When we think of enjoying God outdoors, then we think of wilderness, or we think of mountains or streams or the beach. We don't think of our balcony with our flowers on it. We don't think of Central Park, or of a park in the city in which you live in which you can go and you can walk barefooted through the grass, and you can see the squirrels scurrying about and the pigeons that people are feeding. All of that is being in tune with what God created. I mean, yeah, sometimes we get annoyed when pigeons poop all over our cars. All right, not gonna lie, we do. Or when one of my pet peeves is when cats leave footprints on my car. I just washed it and the cats are putting footprints. But as somebody who's trying to be intentional and say, well, how can I enjoy God today in the outdoors? Don't overthink it, I think, is the big thing. And say, if you live in downtown of a city, say a major city, and it's hard for you to get away from the city, there are still parks in your city that you can go, and you can lean up against a tree and you can just enjoy the tree and the grass and whatever's going on there around you, away from the buildings and concrete. And because I know a lot of people in these big cities, they don't even have cars to be able to go, and a bus isn't going to take them and drop them off in the middle of nowhere and hope they pick them back up. So
Right.
Don't overthink it. Use what's within your resources. As I've lived here in Greenville, South Carolina, the suburbia is getting closer and closer and closer, and every little parcel of ground's being bought up, and they're putting little subdivisions in it. We live on 5 acres, but it's coming. I mean, the subdivisions are coming, and we're talking here recently about, should we go ahead and sell and move to get further out? When we moved here, we were out, and that was only 7 years ago from somewhere else in Greenville. And it's like, how far do you have to go to get away from it? Because I'm somebody who needs a little bit more space than other people, right? So I think, to answer your question, is don't overthink it. Use what's within your reach.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think you even just sharing about like the potted plants, like if that's all that we have, like that's still, God's creation, and that still can be a way that we can connect to him. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I didn't know that you had written a book about that. So I definitely am going to have to read that and check that out.
It's on Amazon. It's an audio book also.
Okay. And I'll link it in the show notes too, in case anyone else wants to read it. But I didn't even know that was one of the topics of your book. All right. Well, switching gears a little bit into the title of this podcast, My Valley, His Victory. Would love for you to share with the listeners a valley or a season of wilderness that you experienced and kind of just what God taught you or prepared you for in that season.
No. Curveball.
Come on, Pete.
Like a lot of people, Mackenzie, it's an uncomfortable subject. Although I say that, but I talk about it a lot. Whenever I go speak at events and so forth, if I'm speaking at a men's study or a corporate event, I always share this, but it's still something that's not easy to talk about. So the listeners are going to be a little bit surprised by this, probably, is that I have a very severe speech impediment. And from the time I was supposed to be talking until, into my early 20s, I couldn't hardly speak out loud at all. It was a severe stutter. Some people call it a stammer. I prefer stutter because I stammer when I say stutter or stutter when I say stammer. So either way, I just go with stutter. And it was just really bad. I mean, Mackenzie, I couldn't form a single sentence without getting stuck on every word. Reading out loud was completely impossible. I mean, I could read, but I couldn't read out loud. First, you have the anxiety of knowing you're going to be stuttering and people smirking and laughing as kids do when you're in school and all that. And went to a lot of speech therapists. None of them helped very much. And then at 15, I felt God calling me to be a pastor. And I was like, God, time out. All right, this is not funny. And he and I had some really strong conversations about how am I going to be able to preach when I can't speak at all. Tell you how bad my speaking was. I played football in high school and baseball, but on the football, I was a quarterback. And I couldn't call the plays in the huddle because I couldn't speak. And if you've ever played football, listeners, on the field, the game goes much faster than it does when you're watching in the stands. You got 30 seconds to get the next play off, or 45 now, but then it was 30. Of course, I played way back there, leather helmets, no face mask. That's how old I am, okay? Not quite.
Whatever. I was going to say.
Not quite that old, but not bad for 130, am I? But so what our coach did, because I was the quarterback, he said, we've got to figure out how we can call plays. So he would send in a wide receiver every play, and the wide receiver would call the play in the huddle because I couldn't do it. And you add the stress and the speed that you need to do in the game time situation. So that's how we got through that. And then I finished high school and I get a scholarship to play baseball in college. And I still had this God saying, I need you to do this. I can't speak. Well, somewhere in there, I don't remember the timing of all this, so forgive me if the timeline's off a little bit. I did find a speech therapist who happened to be my aunt, who taught me what I see, Pete, is that there are certain letter combinations that cause you more trouble than other letter combinations. I'll give you an example in a second. So what she taught me to do was to substitute. So L's and T's, when they're together, I can't say them because my tongue sticks to my mouth on the L's and it won't get the T out. Okay. And if there's, multiple words in a sentence to begin with the same letter, like I'll go very slow. I can go slow and do it, Mackenzie. Where will we go tonight? The 3 W's. We're going to be here a while. Okay. It just, it tries again. But she taught me how to, when I write stuff out, if I'm going to be speaking it, to write it in a way that I could actually say it. Grammatically, it's horrific. Okay. It's not the best word for this situation, but it's the word I can say. And I'm 60 years old now, so I've been doing this for a long time. And so I have modified ways in which I do it. I feel myself stammer or stutter, but you don't hear it often, right? Because it's a little bit longer pause between words than what it normally should be. And that's me giving my brain a reset or my mouth a reset in order to say the word. Another technique that I use, if there's any stutterers out there, and everybody's different, I've talked to a lot of people who struggle with this, is you talk slower than you normally want to, and you make sure and finish this word before you do the next word. I'm doing it more slowly now so you can hear it. Okay. Normally, if I didn't tell you I was doing this, you wouldn't recognize that I'm doing this. Right. I just said the word slowly. When I did, my cheeks blew out. You didn't see that, but I felt it, because the SL is another trigger word for me that is really hard to say. So once I learned how to do this a little bit, I would write my sermons out in manuscript, and then I would memorize them for Sunday, short-term memory. And I'd memorize it by saying it out loud over and over and over again. And like, I can't say that word. The word that means small, but starts with an L.
Little. That
one. Every now and then it'll sneak out, but I usually have to say small or tiny, because the LT's there, and you got a bunch of L's and T's in there, right?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't recognize it listening to it unless I told you. But I'm telling you though, Mackenzie, it is a extremely difficult thing when you have all these words and it's like you're being choked and can't get it out. And even now, let's say that you get upset about something, maybe you get into a heated debate with somebody. That's when I do it the worst, because what happens in a heated debate, you want fast, you're trying to, and I'm like, and I can't get it out. It's very frustrating. And it's something that God has taught me how to, I never want to say overcome, because I still do. But I make a significant portion of my living now speaking, right? I served as a pastor for 12 years. I have a very popular podcast. I'm on a speaking circuit where I go speak at places. And to think of how, as a teenager, I was unable to speak, to what I'm doing now, is a full testament to what God can do with anything. It's hard for a non-stutterer to understand the depth of that valley, but it's something that's, I don't know. It was a very, very difficult thing to endure as a child and young adult. It was very difficult because people don't have patience with you, right? And if you're listening to this and you know, and you have a relationship with somebody who stutters, let me offer this. Don't finish their words for them. Don't guess what they're trying to say. It makes it worse for us. Just be patient and let us get it out. Because if I get stuck on a W and then you say what, now I'm embarrassed. Now I feel belittled. Just be patient with them. Ignore it to the best of your ability and let them speak as well as they can. Because it's a very, very difficult thing to, I don't know. It's not a handicap. It's not a disability. What's the word I'm looking for? Well, it's called an impediment, speech impediment. So, but yeah, so that was
just a struggle.
Yeah. Constantly.
Yeah. Well, and I immediately, whenever you told me that this was what we were talking about and I hadn't heard the full story, my mind immediately went to Moses and the story in the Bible, because, he's like, God picked someone else. Like, I can't speak well.
Yeah.
And I say this often in, when I started my blog and when I started this podcast, like, God's going to call you to things, but he's also going to equip you for them. Like 9 times out of 10, he's not going to call you in a place of something where you feel good at. It's going to be something where his strength or his power has to come in and actually be used through you. And so it's like, if God's going to call you to it, he's going to equip you for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I had a lot of people tell me that early, Mackenzie, that well, Moses had a speech impediment. We think, because he said, "I'm slow to speak," and God said, "Here's Aaron," right? And my response was, "Well, I ain't Moses, in case you didn't know, right? Bad grammar, but I'm not Moses. I'm Pete, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have an Aaron. It's just me." But I did have a fella not too long ago. We were talking about this and some other things that I've gone through. And he just shook his head. He said, "Pete, it looks like the good Lord just blessed you with too much ambition and drive." And I took that as a compliment because even though I tend to be a workaholic, is that once God gives me a vision to do something, I don't know how to not do it wide open until it ends.
Yeah.
And, I don't measure success by number of downloads, right, in podcasting or number of stories sold. I measure success as how does it make me feel and that I honor God in the process.
Yeah.
Right. Because if I get out of his way, he can do great things.
Yeah. And I think even though it may have been for a short amount of time, maybe your Aaron was your aunt that, helped you realize these things and helped you, walk through the process of getting better at speaking. But would love for you to share with the listeners just kind of what, I know you talked about writing out your sermons and that sort of thing, but I think a lot of people, feel that calling to do something, that God's calling them to do something, but they do struggle with that. Well, I'm not good at that. And so, how did you initially even take those first steps and get the confidence to even try? Because I think that's where most people get stuck, is just getting the confidence or the whatever the word I'm looking for is to try.
That's a good question. No one's ever asked me that, Mackenzie. Good question. I'll have to think about that a little bit, but it's odd because of my speaking thing. I was always, a good athlete. And so I had a lot of self-confidence in my abilities on the field, right? Like I said, I had scholarships to play ball in college, baseball as a catcher. So I could hide behind the mask, didn't have to talk. So, quarterbacks are usually catchers or pitchers or both because you're managing the field, right?
Yep.
It's just kind of the same thing. And I don't know. As a young man, they consider it cocky if you're confident. As an older person, they consider it, egotistical if you're confident, right? But I have always been a confident person, meaning I know if I set my mind to it, I'm not going to be the greatest, but I can find out that I can be better than I thought I could be in this arena, whatever this arena is. But I also learned to fail fast. And what I mean by that is if you try something and it ain't working, stop, quit digging, go find something else. Right. And I've done that. I think I want to do this. And well, that's not what I thought it was going to be. No. And then go on to something else. But I think to your question, again, I'm rambling a little bit, is that, I didn't grow up in church. My parents didn't take me to church growing up. My sister, who's 9 years older than me, started taking me to church when I was 12. And that's when I got saved, or when I accepted Christ as my Savior. And then we moved, and my sister got married and stayed, and we moved, and I was back not going to church. But there's always something been inside me that was a calm about things, that I just have always trusted that instinct. And I've always felt like the instinct is the Holy Spirit speaking to you, that still small voice Isaiah talks about. I always felt like that our instinct, our conscience is the Holy Spirit speaking to us. And I've made a lot of bad decisions. Don't get me wrong. I mean, as Paul said, I'm the worst sinner of all. I try hard not to be. I do. I try really hard not to be, but I fail all the time at being as good as I think I need to be. But I also know and have always felt that God is so big and so good that if he wants you to succeed, you will, as long as you get out of his way. And what I mean by that is you have to pray, you have to seek him, and sometimes, like I told you, when I went to the cabin and prayed, I didn't get a clear answer. So I'm like, I guess that means just keep doing what you're doing. And that's what I've learned from that. Just keep doing what you're doing, Pete. I got this. And one of the things I've learned in my life when it comes to this kind of thing, Mackenzie, is we play checkers with our life while God's playing chess. Okay. We're trying to jump over the next person so we can king me. Hey, I can go anywhere I want to. And God's like, no, I'm 5 moves ahead of you, buddy. I am 5 moves ahead of you. You can't do that until Mackenzie does this. And then Mackenzie has to finally say yes before I can open this door for you. Because think about how many times we are blessed by other people, but we don't know how long it took God to get that person to become obedient so that you could get the blessing that you want. So when I say get out of God's way, one of the things I mean is let God use me. Let me be the queen or the rook that can go anywhere. Him take me anywhere so that I can be a blessing to other people. Because at the end of the day, when you get to be my age, Mackenzie, I'm 60. All right. So mortality is a little bit more near for me if I live a normal life than it is for you. You start to realize things. Most people are not remembered past their grandchildren. I mean, you're not. You're just a name at that point. You're just a story, right? So in the short time that I have on this planet, I want the people that I come in contact with, not just family and loved ones, but the people I come in contact with to feel better about themselves and better about their life because of our encounter. However brief it may be, I don't want anyone to leave my presence angry, upset, or mad at me. Now, I'm sure, again, I fail at that at times, but I want to be a positive influence to everybody I come in contact with because I just see how good God is. And the best decision anybody can ever make in their life is not where do I invest my money, which 401k do I make? Do I get a Roth IRA? Do I buy stocks or cryptocurrency? Or do I date this girl or that girl? The best decision you can make is I want to follow Jesus.
Yep.
That's all I got.
No, that's great. That's great. And I love your analogy of chess, like him playing chess, because I think that's so true. And I think, I'm not saying that God doesn't do things alone, but most of the time, and it's, through scripture, he uses other people to do his work for him. And so it's whether or not we are going to be obedient, and also whether the other people in that equation are going to be obedient as well. Yes. I think a lot of times we try to control situations, but it's like, I can't control, perfect example, like I can't control my husband, but I can pray to God and I can do the things within my power, but they have to be doing their own part as well. But no, I think that's such a beautiful word that you just said, like, that is the best decision that we can make. And I think so many times we stress about all of these other decisions, but we need to do exactly what you did whenever you were talking about at the very beginning of this podcast about your podcast. And that is, you went to a cabin, you got alone with God, you prayed, you fasted. I think that's something that is not a large part of the Christian faith anymore. I think a lot of people don't do that as often as they should, or even at all. And I think the Bible's very clear about, like, some battles will only be won, or, some things will only happen through prayer and fasting. And so I think that that's just, your story at the beginning is such a good example of what to do. And, sometimes we get those very clear answers and other times we don't, but that doesn't mean that we stop asking, and it doesn't mean that we just do our own thing either.
Right. Yeah.
So I know you've talked about being a pastor. I don't think that I know this. How long were you a pastor for, or are you still a pastor?
12 years.
Okay.
I served full time for 12 years in the ministry. Yeah. And then God led me in different directions. So you got to follow where he takes you, I mean, I still do a lot of pulpit supply, speaking at churches. I think I said that earlier. The whole month, the half of February and the whole month of March, I'll be speaking at different places throughout the country. And then we got Easter.
Okay.
I'll be home for Easter. Right. And then it picks back up. Then it's turkey season. And that's my thing. Okay. I think the good Lord hates turkeys, and he put me on here to get rid of all of them.
You need to come down the road from me. Every time I drive by this one park, there's and I'm not joking, 100 turkeys in this park.
I love hunting turkeys. I do.
So kind of one of the last things I want to ask you before we close out is, looking back on your journey, what piece of encouragement or hope would you offer to someone who might be in the same exact place that you were however many years ago that was.
Decades. Well,
I'm not good at fast math.
that's fine. Me either. I required my daughters to marry mathematicians because we need something in the family, some kind of help in the family. So, word of encouragement is that I think I would say is that God's timing is not our timing, but He's always on time. A lot of times we want an answer right now, and we feel like we need it right now because of the stress and angst that's going on in our life or whatever. But God's timing is never our timing, but He's always on time. And what I mean by that is a wise old man told me one time that Pete, is really hard sometimes to see where God is, but it's easy to look back and see where He was. Right. Sometimes when we're in the middle of the storm, we can't see and feel God with us. We just can't. I mean, we're human beings, right? And whether you're going through a divorce, whether you're just came home from a funeral of your child dying, or a parent or a loved one, or you just got laid off your job and you got 5 kids at home you're trying to feed, or whatever it is, I've been there too. Then, you know what stress and anxiety is like. But if you put your faith and trust in God, complete faith and trust, He will always see you through. And then you'll look back and say, I don't know how I made it through that, but only by the grace of the good Lord I did. And grace is free, it's for everyone, and it doesn't take a lot of faith. Jesus tells us that. How much faith does it take? Mustard seed. Doesn't take a lot. And to remember that you are worthy enough. We're unworthy, but you matter enough is what I mean to say. You matter enough. You matter to God and to people that love you, even when you feel like you don't. The world is always a better place with you in it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that is such a good word, because that is exactly, I guess, my hope with this podcast is, we can't see God sometimes in the middle of our problems. And so being able to share these stories, and for someone who's going through the same thing, I hope this podcast reaches them. And I hope that, this can be that glimmer of light or that glimmer of hope to get you through, because you're now seeing someone else, seeing how God works through someone else in the same situation. Mm-hmm. And so I just appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate you sharing your story and your valley that you went through and your struggles. And just, I'm so encouraged by how God took, something that one would never think that you're doing what you're doing today, but you did. And praise God for that. And, just like I said before, if He's going to call you to it, He's going to equip you for it, but you got to take that step in obedience. And so just thank you so much for being vulnerable and for sharing your story. And hopefully this is helpful to someone listening. So yeah, just thank you so much. And for those who maybe want to follow along with you and your podcast and your journey, where can they find you?
It's pretty easy. Christian Outdoors podcast on all the platforms. If you type in Christian Outdoors, you're going to find it. So you got the logo there. I don't know if you have video or not, but ChristianOutdoors.org is my website. I have merchandise there. If you want me to come speak at your event, you can just email me there through there. Also, there's a list of places I will be speaking if you're in the area at the time. And on social media, it's just Christian Outdoors Podcast. Instagram and Facebook is Christian Outdoors Podcast. So you can find me there as well.
Awesome.
I'd like to say this, if I may, before you close, is
absolutely.
I am thankful that we met. I really am. And for the listeners out there who are just finding Kinsey, or Mackenzie, as I like to say, you need to follow her because she is real. She is the real deal. She has a great heart for God. And what she's doing here with this show is going to transform a lot of people's lives. So thank you for having me on your show, Mackenzie. I'm very honored.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for those kind words. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.